Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the break. Our second panel today, yet another group of exceptional speakers, is Navigating Gender Persecution, Exploring Domestic Opportunities. This panel examines the complex issue of gender based persecution with a focus on the domestic context in order to identify potential pathways for empowerment and change. The discussion aims to uncover untapped potential, if any, within domestic spheres and advocate for inclusive policies for women. We want to thank wholeheartedly our distinguished moderator, Ghazal Habibyar, for traveling to be with us today. She's the former Minister of Mines and Petroleum in Afghanistan and the former Director of Open Society Afghanistan. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Salam. Sabah khair, khosh amadeen. Good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure to be among you today. But I have to say that it's always been a very emotional day for me. With every poem recited, with the video shared, with every story that was shared today, I cried and cried. And I'm sure that this feeling was not only mine, and many others in the room shared that feeling as well. So apologies if I'm not very professional because it's very, very personal to me. I would also like to remind all of us here that today marks 901 days since girls in Afghanistan are unable to go to schools after grade 6. The only country in the world at this age where girls cannot study. I would also like to remind all of us there are months and months of imprisonment, and death for many activists across Afghanistan and Iran. So, with that, we would like to start this panel today. Before we start the panel, I would like to briefly introduce the distinguished panelists to you. First, we have Richard Bennett, who is the United Nations Special Rapporteur on situation of human rights in Afghanistan, and he has served in different capacities in Afghanistan. We also have with us Jawed Rahman, who's a professor of international human rights and Muslim constitution, and teaches Islamic law and constitutional practices. His publications have been used and translated across the world. Nahid, okay. I think you all are aware of who Naid Farid is by now. And lastly, we have Raha with us. She is a researcher at Amnesty International and works specially on issues of women's rights and human rights in Iran. Just to start our discussions, I would like to pose a couple of questions, and I will start with Richard because I was told that he has to leave earlier. Richard, your current report about the situation of human rights in Afghanistan focuses on issues of women's rights in Afghanistan and the struggle that they go through, and also focuses on the challenges that these restrictions have created for them, health wise, psychological wise, and without lack of access to even basic medical care. I would like you to please give us a bit of detail on your findings, as well as um, give us some of your thoughts about the fact that it seems if even if the Taliban government is not being recognized, but there are so much talks about normalization of the process. What do you feel about that? Do you see that happening, with different talks, because they are bringing relative security, so to say? So we have to basically start. working with them. So I would like to hear your thoughts about that as well. Thanks, Richard.
Um, well, first of all, thank you very much, Ghazal, for your introduction, and thank you to Massey College for inviting me. I'm in Geneva at the Human Rights Council, which is why I was unable to come to in person, though I am hoping to come to Canada before too long. And yeah, I do need to leave a bit early because of a flight that I need to take. But I'll try to answer your questions. And I want to start by saying that um, this week I've been meeting with a lot of Afghan women in while I've been here in Geneva. We brought women here uh, to consult with them about my next report, which is due in June, on widespread discrimination, widespread and systematic discrimination against women and girls in Afghanistan, following up on and building on the report that I wrote last year with the working group on discrimination against women and girls. And today, I just came to this meeting from a side event, and it was an event about women in sport with the Olympics coming up. I was delighted that we had a woman who is going to compete in Taekwondo. We also had a footballer, a soccer player, and the chairperson of the Badminton Federation. And I was just reflecting a little bit on, I managed to tune into the last part of the discussion about cultural rights, and I had invited to this side event also the current special rapporteur on cultural rights. We heard in the last session from the previous special rapporteur, Karima Banoun, and the current special rapporteur, Alexandra Thankis, came and made those same points about cultural rights, that they that often we may shy away from calling out human rights based on cultural issues and sometimes religious sensitivities, but this should not at all be the case. Now, to come to your questions, I don't think this group needs any more information about the situation for women and girls in Afghanistan, and I've set that out in my report quite extensively. But I would also like to just mention very briefly um, something that Seema Samar mentioned. My very good friend Seema Samar mentioned when I heard her speaking at the end of the tail end of the previous session. And I would say that hypothetically, if all of a sudden the situation improved remarkably for women and girls, there would still be a serious human rights situation in Afghanistan. In fact, a human rights crisis, because what we have seen is, first of all, the complete dismantlement of the institutional basis for protection of human rights in any country. That is the setting aside of the constitution, the dissolving of the parliament, the electoral commission being dissolved, the Afghan Independent Human Rights Commission being disbanded, the Ministry of Women's Affairs, all of the judiciary removed. More recently, the Attorney General Office also removed, and the women's shelters also no longer existing. So this whole infrastructure, and I know that Nahid is going to talk more, I think, on this panel about the various edicts and orders and decrees that the Taliban has passed, which eviscerate women from public life. But in addition to that, the infrastructure, the institutional basis has been removed. And so we are seeing, as Seema quite rightly pointed out, additional pressure and discrimination against minorities, ethnic and religious minorities, and beyond that, other types of minorities, people with disabilities, for example, LGBTI community. And particularly we're seeing pressure, extreme pressure on Hazara. This is nothing new, but it has increased. And we should not forget additional pressure also on other minorities like Uzbek and Turkmen people as well. Economic, social, and cultural rights are not being delivered. There is many violations of the rights of children. There are disappearances. There is torture taking place. There's arbitrary detention. We're seeing public executions under Qisas. We're seeing flogging and other and capital corporal punishment as well in public. So a really tragic situation, and that after that we come to, and on International Women's Day, to the almost complete removal of the rights of women and girls. And Ghazal, you mentioned 901 days since girls could attend secondary school or women university, but also right to work, the right to all aspects of public life, political participation are also more or less removed for women and girls. I'll speak very briefly because I think really I'm telling you what you already know and what I've already put in my reports. And we've raised issues of gender persecution and the framing of gender apartheid in my reports, and I spoke on that last week at the council. But you asked about the normalization issue. That, in fact, was probably my main message to the Human Rights Council last week, and I continued it this week as well in a number of group meetings and individual meetings, particularly with states. It is concerning that there appears to be a trend, if not for recognition, as you said, because I don't think that the Taliban are going to be taking the seat at the General Assembly anytime soon. But there is a kind of creeping normalization in terms of accepting and going back to kind of business as usual. We're seeing that partly from the region and from some large countries in the region. But I'm also concerned that countries that have typically stood up for human rights are starting to think that this is a fait accompli, and that there's a tendency to start making steps towards more engagement. I'm not against engagement because I'm for engagement that uses human rights advocacy upfront, that makes very clear that in every form of engagement, whether it's a discussion about agriculture or airspace, it should still be predicated around human rights and the rights of women. So I am very concerned about that, and my message has been that there should be absolutely no normalization of a regime that treats women and girls the worst of any country in the world by far. And that is in a situation where, in a context where there is a global pushback or rollback on women and girls' rights. We really need to stand up for these issues. And I don't know whether Canadian government officials are present. They have reassured me that they are making no moves towards the Taliban. And I'm very pleased to hear that. And I would reiterate that that is, in my view, the correct position until there are concrete, demonstrated, meaningful, and measurable improvements in the human rights situation, and especially for the human rights of women and girls. Thank you.
Sure. I'm sure the audience have questions, and I do have questions, but I'll let the other panelists speak before we get back to you if you're still with us. My next question is to Jawed, who is also the special United Nations Special Rapporteur on human rights issues in Iran. So similar question to what I asked from Richard on in case of Afghanistan. The latest report that you had actually spoke about the aftermaths of Mahsa Amini's death and the protests that were carried out not only in Iran but across the globe in support of women's rights in Iran. I wanted to know to what extent you see the recommendations that you have in the report accepted and respected by the Iranian government, and also what do you think motivated people across the globe to actually take part in those protests? And also, with such a large support for women's right in Iran, in Afghanistan that we see across the globe, why is it so difficult that still gender apartheid is not recognized as international crime? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, within these questions, there are several others. So, thank you very much for allowing me this opportunity. So, I'm sure your audiences are familiar with what happened with the commencement of the Women Life Freedom Movement, the killing of Gina Massamini, who died in police custody on 16th of September. And she basically died because the morality police alleged that she was wearing the so-called improper hijab. Now, her death sparked nationwide protests, as you all know. People of all generations, ages, gender, women, girls, men, and boys, they all joined. And this was an unprecedented nationwide movement whereby I reported that uh, over 160 cities witnessed that in all 31 provinces of the country. And tragically, we saw that at least 537 persons, which included 68 children and 48 women, were killed. And I mean, one would ask themselves what were the reasons behind what happened. Obviously, the immediate trigger, what sparked, was the killing of Gina Masta. But there were a number of reasons. There was a multitude of reasons, and that's why I think this is very important for us to understand why this movement was so unique, and it has a long-term impact. You see, so this whole issue of hijab, you see, obviously the tragic death in the police custody of Gina Massamini is unacceptable, and we raised our very serious concerns, seeking a thorough and transparent investigation, which never took place, unfortunately. But the issue of hijab goes back, decades. In fact, it goes back to the point of the Islamic Revolution, and as we know that the hijab became compulsory in the early 1980s. But there were immediate issues that need to be addressed as to why uh, Gina Mahsa Amini was brutally assaulted and killed. And you see, if you look at the events just preceding to September of 2022, you look at the increasing repression which women were facing already in that year. So, so the morality police had expanded their patrols. Women were increasingly being repressed, and some of you may know the saga of this 28-year-old artist called Sapide Rashuno, whose video became viral when she was being forced to wear a headscarf by an older woman. And then she was hospitalized and then came on state TV and appeared to be reading something from official script. And her saga, unfortunately, goes on. Um, but what I'm saying is that there was increasing repression. If you look at the situation and the statements made by, for example, the head of judiciary in July 2022, and then President Ibrahim Raisi, who I think is the maker of a lot of evils in Iran, actually further decreed repressive measures in August. He made some harsh statements as well. And there was sheer brutality shown towards girls and women. And what we see is that the killing of Gina Masamini prompted the nation to reflect on a lot of their grievances. You see, we saw and we took note of how ethnic and religious minorities reacted. So, for example, and as you know, that Gina Masamini was from a Kurdish background. Um, Kurds were brutally repressed, and so were Balochis. So, on one day, just in one day, what is called the Black uh, September, the Black Friday, at least 95 people were killed, brutally killed by the state authorities, and yet no one has ever been held accountable. So, absent of accountability, consistent repression, all of these factors made this movement quite unique and quite exceptional. And that is why, if you look at my previous report, I have termed um, the tragedy and the aftermath and the repression as signifying crimes against humanity. And this is a very serious point to note, that crimes against humanity in the context that they have taken place. And obviously, the Human Rights Council then established the fact-finding mission, who, by the way, has just released its own report, which will be presented next week. So, as a consequences of this traumatic event and the the overarching repression that the country has been facing, in particular women and girls, I think the response has been quite overwhelming. And what I would say is that the state has reacted even more aggressively to uh, to the movement. So, so if you look at what has been happening since September of 2022, despite calls from international community to be transparent, to have accountability, to end impunity, instead I would say a path of desperation has been chosen by the Iranian authorities. So, as I report again in my most recent report, that we have seen that just in last year, over 1 million of SMS messages were sent to women, threatening them that if they traveled without veil, their vehicles would be impounded and confiscated. And in fact, thousands of orders were implemented of that sort. And then the state forcibly closed hundreds of businesses because they were not enforcing the veiling laws. And countless women have been denied educational rights, public transportation, banking, and other fundamental human rights. And as we know, that the morality police, which apparently there was some discussion in December of 2022 that they may have been disbanded. That was again a very devious ploy on the part of the Iranian regime. They're back on the street. They have been redeployed. And worst of all, you see, in their own desperation, the Iranian regime and the apparatus, the state apparatus, they have now presented a bill before the Guardian Council, which is called the Bill to Support the Family by Promoting the Culture of Chastity and Hijab, which further implements, or which promises to implement draconian measures restricting socioeconomic rights, including flogging for women. So I think that this is a very serious indictment on a desperate regime. Now, if I can just take a moment to say that there are also some very serious concerning issues uh, about how Iranian regime has uh, has brutalized women. You see, they have violated the human rights of women and girls. So again, I have pointed out in my various reports. I mean, if you look at the laws and practices of the Iranian regime, it is shocking that they violate women to such an extent. So, for example, Iran tops the execution list of women. In one of my previous reports, I've noted that at least 172 women have been executed from 2010 to 2021. Iran is therefore the leading executioner, as we know. Um, in just in 2023, they executed 22 women. Yeah, and in 2022, they executed 16 of the 24 women that were sent to gallows across the world. So you can see the venom that there exists, the hatred that there is, uh, followed by the Iranian regime against girls and women. And the tragedy of all this is, if you look at the situation of women and girls, is that most of these women who are executed are actually themselves victims. So many of them are charged and convicted of qisas offenses, which means retribution in kind, and they're themselves victims because many of them are subjected to domestic violence. They're abused, and as many of you would be aware, that Iran sanctions lawfully allows child marriages. Girls as young as 13 and even younger girls can marry with the consent of the father in the court. So what I'm saying is that victims are themselves victims, girls victims who are themselves been subjected to domestic violence or child abuse or child marriage are then sent to gallows. They are punished. I mean, one clear reflection is the age of criminal responsibility, which again is gender discriminatory because girls, according to the penal code, achieve maturity and criminal responsibility at the age of 9, whereas for boys it is 15. So there is a huge amount of gender discrimination, gender discriminatory practices. Some other reflections I can quickly share with you relate to honor killings. You see, in terms of honor killings, it is a widespread practice. There are laws that perpetuate. There are laws which allow killing, violence against girls and women. They reduce punishment, so they allow exemptions. For example, where a man is claiming that he has witnessed his wife in an adulterous relationship, he is exempted from the punishment. Again, men who kill their children or grandchildren um, are exonerated because they apparently they are the owners of their blood. You see, so that kind of laws, they encourage violence against children and women. And of course, when we reflect on the situation of Gina Masa Amini, why did she have to die? Isn't that an example, a very clear example of state brutality? What kind of law was it which brutalized and humiliated her? And by the way, this law applies to all women. It is not only applicable to Muslim women. Any woman, whether she is Muslim or not, has to comply, and if she doesn't, then she will be brutalized. You see, and what we saw that women who were and girls who were protesting, they were subjected to a lot of violence. I mean, in my report, I have mentioned that there were doctors who sent me information that women and girls who were protesting were targeted, shot um, at their very delicate parts of their body, and yet there has been no accountability. We have had reports, as you know, of poisoning of thousands of girls in Iran, and yet there has been no accountability as to what has happened. So the direction of this regime is pretty much towards violence against girls and women. Now, the elements of your question about looking ahead and what are the potential long-term implications, what is going to happen. What I will say to you is that this has been a great tragedy for the people, women and girls of Iran. What has been happening to them? But you see, you have to remember, and you have to note that the life, women, freedom movement is irreversible. See, this movement is unprecedented. From what I hear, and I know that many of you have friends and families, or you're visiting from Iran itself. I will say that the brave women and girls of Iran have sent a message to the Iranian authorities that they will no longer accept a vile, unacceptable, and degrading law which humiliates them. See, it is a message also to the world. It is also a message to the world that they will no longer accept, that women will no longer accept an oppressive law, a law which reflects gender apartheid. And that's why we are working towards having international legal framework. And I will just come to the point which you raised about the complexity of gender apartheid. You see, my
Um,
position is that
Sorry, can we
yeah.
come back to you? I mean, these reflections are wonderful and we learned a lot from it. But in the interest of time and the fact that I have two other panelists, can we just come back to this discussion again?
Yes, please. But can I finish this one point
Sure.
on gender apartheid? The gender apartheid issue is a very complex one. You see, obviously we have countries like Iran and Afghanistan where there are clear manifestations, but it is a global issue, and often when we challenge gender apartheid, there are complexities, and I have raised my concerns that in many parts of the world, including my own country, Pakistan, there are aspects of gender apartheid. So, for example, if you look at the laws, how they are practiced and followed on, for example, discrimination in inheritance laws or in family laws, they are all elements of gender apartheid, and yet they are practiced so rigidly, and nobody challenges them. So I would want gender apartheid to become an element of international criminal law, but the challenges are quite significant. I will stop here, and thank you for giving me this extra bit of time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your reflections. I'll go to Naijan next. Naijan, you have been a part of the so-called empowerment era of last 20 decades in Afghanistan, where we had a constitution that supported us, thanks to people like Dr. Saib who worked hard on it. We had legal frameworks who supported us, where you, I, and so many other people like us managed to do what we did and work the way we did. Uh, it's so raw still. Um, yes, but can you briefly talk about the latest report that you had on the different decrees that they had, and also the Taliban have issued since they came into power, and also the relationship of those decrees with international law, and how things can be learned, and what's the way forward for us?
Sure,
Thank you.
sure. Thank you so much, Ghazal John. And let me thank the conveners of this important conference at this very timely manner, at this very sensitive time, at International Women's Day. Let me congratulate International Women's Day to all human beings who believe in justice and who believe in humanity. And let's congratulate and also acknowledge the bravery and courage of women of Afghanistan and women of Iran at this important day, with acknowledging the fact that with the storm of oppression and suffering, they continue to be resistant, they continue to be resilient, they continue to say that we exist, we want to be counted as human beings, as citizens of our countries. And this is, I think, a very little I think it's just a small step of appreciation of what they are doing and what they are adding to the history of human beings in order to recognize justice and humanity. Um, yes, we had a policy brief. Professor Rangita also co-authored and helped put together some evidence from on the ground, some interviews from women in Afghanistan, and also some international resolutions that are there to protect women. And I think those edicts that Taliban have been implementing and issued against women, that it was one of the earliest, I think, perhaps one of the earliest policy brief and compilation of all those decrees in March 2022. That by that time, we saw more than 80% of decrees of the Taliban were against women, while Afghanistan is facing and was facing multiple crises of economy and earthquake and healthcare problem. We see that this former insurgent that are in charge of the country have no willingness and no kind of um, no knowledge and expertise in basically tackling multiple crises that Afghan people are facing, and they just targeted women because they wanted to use women as bargaining chip for their international agendas. But you talked about the background, right? The background of our work. But I think we have to also acknowledge that from every corner of the world, we have to acknowledge that there had been work that we have to call them unfinished businesses of women. And we have to count them in and continue building upon those unfinished businesses, those frameworks, those national action plans that we had inside of Afghanistan, those acknowledgement of international resolutions that Afghanistan actually joined so many treaties, including the CEDAW that is one of the most important one, while it is not pushing government towards implementing the laws, but it is important, and Afghanistan was part of it. But I wanted to point out the impact of the Taliban's decrees on women. You talked about the uneasy road that we traveled so far, those challenging roads that Afghan women actually traveled in the last 2 decades, and also before that, we have a representation of women like Dr. Sima Samar here. Before that 2 decades that we have been in the politics of Afghanistan, we have women like her that continue to champion women's rights. This uneasy road that we traveled so hard is disappeared as we look back. We have to reimagine that. We have to find ways to make sure that road is still there, and we have to reimagine and find out ways to make sure those unfinished businesses are still there, and we have to build upon that. I also wanted to point out about the other impacts of those decrees that we traditionally talk about. Oh, this will bring illiteracy. This will bring unemployment. This will bring restrictions on women. I would say, let's go beyond that. This will create the lost generation of women and girls in a country. This kind of decrees will erase women from the face of the earth. They will not be identified as human beings. They will be lost. Amazing women and girls that are vibrant and are ready to change the world will be just vanished by this law. These are the impact. And I think this is very important to highlight that these laws sent women centuries back. Do we remember women from centuries back? Yes, maybe some handful of them. But so many of women who are alive today will be sent back because of these laws, and this is how the Taliban have targeted the women in a powerful and epic movie of Cry Freedom, which is not afraid to take side in a pressing issue that we are talking about apartheid. In 1988, there is a very popular dialogue of Donald Wood that I thought it's important to talk about that because it is also important to acknowledge that this is also an impact of that kind of decrease. He says, when people are kept in a situation of inferiority, they begin to doubt their own abilities. They end up believing that they are incapable of change. It is this principle, this sense of hopelessness and inertia, that is the greatest ally of dictatorship. Because it is this feeling of powerlessness that turns people into accomplices, into collaborators, into people who will be silent under authoritarian regimes, into the people who think they cannot do anything because they have no power. That's why this conference is important. That's why each and every one of you as audience are important to join this movement and let those who are under authoritarian regimes, who are oppressed, to let them know that they are not alone. They are capable of change, and we are here to echo their voices. I also want to highlight another impact, which is an intergenerational victimization of women under conflict. When I decided to leave Afghanistan during the time in 2021, during the Taliban takeover, it was a very distressing moment for me personally. Choosing between two unwanted options of staying in fear or leaving everything behind. But it was also a very distressing moment because I was living with my daughter by my side, with all the things that was in my mind. But at the top, I remembered the stories of my mom that, like me, she escaped the same city decades ago with her daughter by her side, escaping the clutches and oppression of Soviet Union operation. She also used the same road that I did. She went to the same city that I escaped. This is the intergenerational, I would say, victimization, at the same time resilience, because we came back and we will continue to go back. We will claim our hijacked freedom. But this is an impact. Countless mothers and daughters throughout the history of human beings, and also in Afghanistan and Iran, are leaving their hometown to seek freedom. And we have to stop that cycle. And this is a very important, I think, takeaway from this conference. We have to, this story is not unique. My story is not unique, but it is a stark reminder of the fact that countless mothers and daughters are waiting for you and waiting for us to help them stay in a country that they belong and enjoy their hometown. I want to stop here, but I have some action items because we are at the University of Toronto, Massey College, at a very important corner of the world, which is Canada, with feminist foreign policy strategy. And I think Canada can play a very important role in furthering the movement of women's rights all over the world, and especially in Afghanistan.
Thank you so much, Naijan. I think you're right. Our stories are not unique, but I hope this is the end of it. And I hope our daughters will not go through the same thing that we did and our mothers did. We will definitely come back to the action items. I hope we will have time. But in the meantime, I would like to invite Rahat to speak on her research about the prosecution of Iranian women who basically defied or came out with so-called improper veil, and the kind of problems and even rape and issues that they had to face while in prison. If you could just highlight a bit on that, Rahat, thank you. But we are quite short of time, so I would love to, if you could be brief. Thank you.
Hello and good afternoon. Thank you very much for organizing this important conference, especially on the occasion of the International Women's Day. Amnesty International has been documenting the intensifying persecution of women and girls in Iran, particularly in connection with abusive compulsory veiling laws. The persecution and the methods that the Iranian authorities have imposed to enforce repressive compulsory veiling laws span from mass confiscation of women's vehicles, especially in recent months, to imposing fines, flogging, and prison sentences on women, as well as other penalties such as being forced to attend morality classes. I'm going to focus on the abusive practice of confiscating women's vehicles because it might have not received enough attention when this practice has been increasing over the past year. Hundreds of thousands of women have had their cars arbitrarily confiscated as a punishment for defying Iran's compulsory veiling laws. This has been accompanied by subjecting women to daily policing and mass surveillance and referring them to the prosecution authorities if they repeatedly drive without a headscarf, or if they are seen in cars as girls or women passengers without a headscarf. According to official statements, this practice has resulted in the confiscation of hundreds of thousands of vehicles. Just this February, we issued a call asking women and girls and their relatives in Iran to contact Amnesty International and share their testimonies. We obtained the testimonies of 46 individuals, including 41 women, 4 men, and 1 girl. Their testimonies provide a frightening glimpse into the daily reality of women and girls in Iran and how the authorities try to disrupt their daily lives and cause them immense mental anguish in order to force them to put on a headscarf when they appear in public. I'm going to tell you about this mass confiscations through the voices of some of the women we talked to. Sarah told us how security forces these days stand in busy junctions and whenever possible, they stop women passing by car and check if there is a confiscation order against them in the system. They target all sorts of women with or without headscarves if they suspect that the woman might have been the subject of confiscation text messages. These text messages are basically registered in the system based on pictures taken by surveillance cameras that are placed across all the busy roads and highways in Iran, or based on reports that plainclothes agents submit to the police reporting women appearing without a veil or with what they call improper veiling in public, including in their cars. Another woman, Parveen, told us how when the police agents confiscate women's cars, they do not care at all in what situation the women are. For example, women have been stopped and suddenly had their cars confiscated when they were on their way to school or to work or to medical appointments. Sarah told us that they just want to harass us. It is not important, even if you are dying. They would still tell you to leave your car and then go to the doctor. They do not care which situation you find yourself in the moment, and they don't have an ounce of humanity in them. Monire, who had just had a surgery, told us that you live with the constant stress of your car being impounded. Sometimes I thought about handing in my car just to be rid of this constant stress. Police officers on motorcycles chased women, and I developed a phobia of motorcyclists. I was distracted by all motorcyclists, and I was worried that I would have an accident. Orkide told us that when cars are confiscated, women have to go to the security police in order to give a written commitment to observe compulsory veiling in order to receive their car back. She said that the way they treated me was very bad, as if I had committed a very wrong act. It was humiliating. The first thing they say is, "What kind of appearance is this? Fix your headscarf." They criticize the color and type of your clothes and even your nails and makeup. They say, "Do you think you can do whatever you want, as if there are no laws here? Do you think you can dress however you want and present yourself to men?" She said that uh, this process caused her immense anguish, and she lives with the constant stress of having her car confiscated again. The Morality Security Police right now in Iran refers the cases of many women whose cars are confiscated to the prosecution and judicial authorities. In addition, plainclothes agents across all public spaces monitor women and may refer them to the prosecution authorities. We documented the cases of women who suddenly received a summons from the prosecution authorities, and when they went there, they were threatened with flogging and imprisonment and received various prosecution orders. We documented the case of a 16-year-old girl who was reported to the prosecution authorities because she did not wear a headscarf in her father's car. Her father told us that the authorities charged the father and the 16-year-old girl with the presence of women without Islamic hijab in public spaces. This girl was referred to a juvenile court who prosecuted her, and the judge threatened the girl with imprisonment and flogging. And eventually, after the father repeatedly protested that this girl is under 18 years of age, the juvenile court, acquitted the girl, but referred her to the moral security police to sign an undertaking. Her father told us that since then, my daughter is forced to observe compulsory veiling in the car. Otherwise, we will have to face the same disrespect, the same hassle of trying to retrieve the car. When the car is impounded for 17 or 18 days, we have to take taxis and face numerous difficulties, including financial challenges. And it's not worth enduring all that trouble and facing multiple senseless people who treat us with disrespect. The father added that her daughter Negin is not like before. She has become anxious and irritable, and the events after the death in custody of Gina Amini, the developments of around veiling, and the chemical attacks on schoolgirls have all had a significant impact on young girls. The father said that her girl, along with other young girls in Iran, do not feel safe. My daughter has repeatedly said that we should leave Iran. Leave Iran. At this stage, she just cannot bear it. This is what Negin's father told us. Many other women also told us that they constantly feel stressed, that the authorities are taking pictures of them and filming them. And one woman, Najia, said that she's afraid that if I go to court a second time, they will flog me. At the same time, Najia reflected the voices of many women we've talked to, that they are determined to continue their struggle against compulsory veiling. Najia said that prior to the Women Life Freedom Revolution, we felt that the headscarf was simply a part of our clothing that we had to wear. But afterwards, we realized that we can actually remove our headscarves and that it should not exist. I've been to court once, but compared to people who lost their lives or those who were tortured in prison, this is nothing. The Islamic Republic has become so desperate that it's terrified of the absence of a piece of cloth like a headscarf. Of course, the issue of compulsory veiling goes beyond a piece of clothing on women's head. It's the most potent symbol of discrimination and subjugation of women in the Iranian society. It's the way for the Islamic Republic to assert its control over women and girls as well as over the broader population. That is the reason that in the aftermath of the Women Life Freedom Uprising, the authorities have been waging this repressive campaign to enforce compulsory veiling as a way to reassert their control and remind the society that they will keep an iron grip on power. In addition to these mass police checks and confiscations of vehicles, women continue to face denial of access to public services and public places, including airports, train stations, metros, and banks, and their access is conditioned on them wearing headscarves. Parveen told us that everywhere you go, you face the same problem. Banks and public buildings have intelligence departments who do not allow you to enter, let alone serve you. In the entrance of the metro, there are female officials who do not allow you to enter. Another woman told us, Neda, that a few months ago, the deputy head of my bank confronted me and said I had to wear my hijab. Otherwise, he would not proceed with my banking needs. Neda also mentioned that a hijab enforcer at a metro station in Tehran recently physically assaulted her cousin, who is 21 years old, and punched her in the chest because she was not wearing a headscarf. The authorities are especially strict at airports. Firuze told us that immediately when you enter the airport, they say things like your overcoat is short, your trousers are short, your ankles are visible, your wrists are visible, and they deny you access to the airport, and they deny you your boarding pass unless you wear a headscarf. Nushin told us that in order to receive her boarding pass, the officers insisted that she must put on a headscarf. And when she said she doesn't have a headscarf on her, they actually forced her to put on a towel on her head just so that she could get her headscarf. Many women shared these stories with us. That shows that despite all these risks, they are determined to continue their struggle against compulsory veiling laws. I just want to also end with one note about the comments that women have received from judges and police officers about their heavy workload these days, because they have to process hundreds of thousands of cases of women across the country who've been referred by the police to the prosecution authorities for defying compulsory veiling laws. Just in one province, in Qom province, according to the chief police there, they've had nearly 2,000 criminal cases in that province alone over the past year in relation to women and girls defying compulsory veiling laws. This shows that the scale of the problem is really widespread and has gone completely unreported at the international level. Police officers have also told women that on a daily basis, around 70 or 80% of their workload these days is in relation to confiscating women's cars, taking them to police stations, and then subsequently processing their request for release. And they've actually blamed women for this struggle and have told them to put on a headscarf so that they don't have to spend 70% of their day dealing with these cases. This is, of course, very sad. It shows to what extent women on a daily basis face such severe disruptions of their daily lives, which is just unimaginable. But it also shows to what extent women and girls in Iran are resilient and continue this brave struggle. Just to end, one 17-year-old girl, Golnar, told us that after she was threatened with by the school principal about being reported to the intelligence organization of the Revolutionary Guard simply because she did not wear the headscarf in her school, she has had to comply with compulsory veiling at her school. However, she said that we are forced to veil the wear. If our society was a free one, we would like to have a secular state without compulsory veiling. We like to be like young people in other countries, and we ask the world to support our generation so that we too can have freedoms like young people in other countries, freedom of
Thank you.
expression and freedom of clothing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raha. That was very insightful. Some of you might wonder how a veiled woman herself is questioning about the regulations about veil in Iran. Well, I have to say that this was a choice for me. For them, it's not. And when in 1996 Taliban were in power in Afghanistan, even though I was a little girl, I actually did not wear veil as a protest. It was in 2001 when I started wearing it. But anyways, I just wanted to see if there were any questions in the audience. We will take them quickly, and then I will ask Nahid to please. Can we have the mic here? We have two questions here on this side and two questions on this side. Can you please also identify yourself and actually say who do you want to ask the question from?
Unfortunately, there's always a deep and sad connection between Taliban, Afghan women, Afghanistan at all. My name is Shaima Karimi. I'm an activist in Afghanistan. So, like in a few days later, it's the academic years for Afghanistan, especially for women. My question is especially for Richard Bond, if he is here. Uh, sorry for pronouncing the name not correctly. Um, I would appreciate to hear from you as a special human rights that working for Afghan rights in Afghanistan currently. What are the key prioritized for international community in supporting Afghan women and girls, particularly in education? One question. And the other question is for Nahid Jan. Like we left at the same times. There's a personal struggling that I'm always struggle with this question. The decision between staying in Afghanistan or leaving. All people who left Afghanistan always struggling with this question. If we stay in Afghanistan, the situation could be better than now. Thank you.
We had another question from this side. I think she was first. Yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Salsalana Siri. First of all, I want to say it was a very emotional feeling, and it's emotional feeling right now for me. Everything is sadness, but I want to say I and my friends was no, sorry. I and my friend was the woman that the first and the second week of the Taliban, we protest in Afghanistan. We were in a Hawzit Sea and Polisur, and I guess with the Taliban. So we know how it was hard. And now my friend is in Afghanistan, and they against with the Taliban, they have protests. I can say about Julia Parsi. He was about 3.5 months with his son in jail of the Taliban, and now Manija Siddiqui, one of my friend, he is in a Taliban jail. I want to say, my question is from Richard Bennett. When they have negotiation with the Taliban leader, did they talk about the political prisoners in Afghanistan, especially about the women? Because one of their policies, the force with the women in Afghanistan, with all that they have done. And it was not easy for me, for my friends, and even for my family, because without nothing, they go in jail and no one is here to ask them what's their crime, why they are victim, why they are here. Thank you so much.
And we had questions on this side. The lady in white, please, Nazarisa.
Hi, my
Hello.
name is Nagin Kambish. Thank you to all the panelists. My question is regarding the role of the UN. Mr. Bennett mentioned that Taliban's oppression of women and girls shouldn't be normalized. With that said, regarding the situation in Iran since 2022, would you say that appointing Iran as the chair for the Human Rights Council would also be validating and normalizing the regime's behavior? Thank you.
I don't think so. I'm just getting cue, but I think during lunch, at least one of the panelists is here, when we would be able to discuss the issues further. Um, since Richard is not here, oh, you are.
Oh, I'm still here, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I did hear the questions, and I really have to go. I'm going to miss my flight, but I wanted to just kind of respond in 1 minute to say, let's not talk about normalization without accountability. There has been almost no accountability, no consequences And that has to come first, including for the women and some men who have been arbitrarily detained. And you mentioned names, and I'm familiar with those people, and actually in touch with them or their families. I think, as Nahid has pointed out, there are the relentless issuing of edicts, decrees, declarations, and directives restricting the rights of women and girls, and including their freedom of movement, dress, behavior, access to education, work, health, and justice. This is, in a way, self-incrimination, because it is proudly announced as a policy and then implemented by the Taliban. And we've seen hijab arrests this year particularly. So I think in response, there ought to be accountability, and Nahid mentioned accomplices and collaboration. So I would call on the international community not to be collaborators, not to be accomplices. And that means insisting on respect for human rights, and especially rights of women and girls. And accountability can be in different ways. There can be political accountability, that is political consequences, and there can be judicial accountability that you're aware of. And I think we need in Afghanistan an all-tools approach to attempt to ensure that there is more pressure put on the Taliban to ease up, to change. There is no Taliban 2.0. That was wishful thinking from the beginning. But all the same, there is some leverage. They do want acceptance. They do want that seat in the General Assembly, in my view. And that is something that the international community needs to exert more pressure over for change. I'm not seeing things going in a positive direction. I think when, 2 years ago, the Taliban were in denial of their violations. That has now, they were saying that just give us time, for example, for reopening schools. Now they become belligerent and aggressive. They call me a propagandist. They say that it's their sovereignty. Now, I'm sorry, under international human rights law, they cannot claim that. Either they opt out altogether, or if they say that they want to be part of the international community and the United Nations, then the Universal Declaration and all the international human rights treaties apply to those who control that state, even if they're not a de jure government, but a de facto one. Sorry, I would love to stay longer. I have to now run. I really think this is an amazingly important conversation that you're having, and especially emotional one for many of you on International Women's Day. Thank you. Now I need to go.
Thank you so much. I'm in a hard place. Professor Ahwad wants me to finish, and Naid wants to take one more minute, but since it's International Women's Day, I'll go with her.
Thank you,
Apologies.
and I would take the privilege of being the only in-person speaker at this panel. I think it was a very insightful panel. Thank you to your moderation. Why international community should look to the issue of gender apartheid from a different angle, why it is important. First of all, I'm talking as an Afghan. The fall of Afghanistan under Taliban, number one, the fall of Afghanistan under Taliban was the result of the flawed and wrong policies of international community. That's why they have to have this responsibility. Two, the gender apartheid conceptualization is not only crucial for Afghanistan, it's critically important for all UN and entire international mechanisms that are created to protect women. They will lose their credibility if they cannot help women of Afghanistan at the greatest time of their need. Number 3, Taliban's brutal 2-year in place showed us that these mechanisms of human rights protection that are in place, including the people, the amazing people like Richard Bennett, that is trying days and night to highlight the plight of Afghan women, are important but are insufficient, are not enough. We need more concrete international human rights mechanism, human rights protection mechanism to highlight the issue of women. Number 4, in a word, witnessing the backsliding of democracy from Afghanistan to Burma to across Central America, it's imperative for all of us as individuals, institutions, universities, to pursue the mission of protecting the values of international values of human rights and women's rights and democracy, because we see democracy is in a backsliding, and we have to step in. And number 5 is that what happened in Afghanistan can occur anywhere in the world. A group of terrorists, a group of fundamentalists can overthrow a democratically elected government, erase the hard-won gains and achievement of the whole society in a matter of hours. It can happen anywhere. Let's start stopping them from where they started, which is Afghanistan. Action items. 1. Since 2006, Afghan women have been eagerly awaiting actions from the International Criminal Court. Since 2006, even before the fall of Afghanistan under Taliban. But unfortunately, no significant steps have been taken. They hope to see Taliban behind the bar, accountable for their actions, and they have to bring the Taliban to the justice. We need ICC to step in. Since Taliban takeover, no further sanction, no further travel ban against the Taliban have been taken and have been elevated. Nothing. We all heard all these issues, but all the sanctions that are in place have been from the time they were not in power. Since they have been in power, no sanction, no travel ban have been in place or have been elevated against them. All countries say we care about human rights in Afghanistan. No country so far stepped in and moved forward the case of Afghanistan in International Criminal Court, in United Nations, and other important platforms. Another action item push gender apartheid to be recognized as a crime against humanity, which is important. The last one, because we are in Canada, we are at Toronto, sanctions are implemented in Canadian law by adopting regulations under the United Nations Act. This is happening, and this can happen against the Taliban, who are perpetrators of human rights in Afghanistan. They also can adopt regulations under a Special Economic Measure Act that is also a regulation and a framework that can be used against the Taliban because they are perpetrators of human rights. I would stop here, but I would love to continue the conversation during the lunch. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Azal, could I make a final comment? I don't know if my voice is being heard.
We have others who are going to be joining us from different parts of the world. So I'm afraid we have to stop here. I wish, as I said with the previous panel, that we had many days to benefit from these extraordinary individuals. But I thank you very much, Ghazal John, for your capable moderating, and to all the panelists for their wonderful and challenging remarks. So we are now going to have a lunch break because we are half an hour late. We will have to limit it to 45 minutes, which means we start the next panel 15 minutes late. So I would ask you please to be here promptly at 1:45. We will begin at 1:45 sharp, the third panel. Thank you.